Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Hold on to the edge of your seats because you are in for quite the ride. It's time for the Granada Forum Radio Show. Right now, live on air with your host, Granada, Wendy.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Granada Forum Radio program. We have an incredible guest tonight. We have Miss Deborah Tavares, and she's going to be with us very shortly. I'd like to thank my co-host, Nick Pearson. Are you there, handsome?
Hey, hey.
And my wonderful producer, which we cannot live without, and we are so grateful for this man, Mr. Richard Kane.
Hello, hello.
Thank you. By the way, this is Revolution Radio. We are the #1 commercial-free listener-supported internet talk radio station in the world. We are at freedomslips.com, so that's freedomslips, SLIPS.com. And if you try to get into us tonight, maybe our phone number might be 206-855-3056. That's 206-855-3056. Also, real quick, next week, 2 weeks from now, we will be live at the Natural Health Product Show, me and Nick, and our wonderful producer, Rich, at the Natural Health Product Show Expo West, and that will be in Anaheim at the Anaheim Convention Center. We'll be at the Marriott, and we'll be doing a live show there, and we're looking forward to that. That will be on the 9th of March. That's the 9th of March. And we also want to say hello to the Health Product Show, which we'll be there live, too, in September at the Marriott and by LAX. I think it's the 22nd and the 23rd in September. But we will be at the Natural Health Product Show Expo West March 9th, and that will be fantastic. We have the most incredible guest. Real quick, though, before I do that, let me just say this. If you'd like to leave a equivalent to a cup of coffee, please check out the homepage of the Revolution Radio. And then if you'd like to make a donation of $100, you can check out Nighthawk's special for $100. I believe it's 3,500 seeds, how to grow, how to plant, how to store. So it's very worth it. We thank you so much for that, Mr. Nighthawk. So back to our guest, Deborah Tavares. A wonderful guest. One of her websites is www.stopthecrime.net. That's www.stopthecrime.net. And I believe the other one is, if you're there, I know you're there, Deborah, is www.primarywater.org. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. We have, of course, toxicsky.org, and we also have refusesmartmeters.com or smartmetersmurder. And they all tie in. You can go to stopthecrime.net and access the other websites. Our predominant website is stopthecrime.net. The main, next most important website is primarywater.org. We're going to focus on water a bit to open this up this evening because this is becoming something that is a major psyops, and I want to talk about that. But there's a lot to talk about tonight, so I would ask everybody that's listening to please get pencil and paper and check some of these things out for yourselves. And just know that for those of you that understand and hear and know what I'm saying, we're all together, we're not alone. We have to link up arms because we are in some exceedingly diabolical times. And it is, as I'm quite assured by other people, that it is going to get demonstratively worse than it is right now. And I can see it escalating here, especially in Sonoma County, Northern California. But it's not the ground zero for all of this. It's just that I'm here and I'm able to go to meetings and I'm able to report some diabolical things, but I look across the country and I look at other cities. They're all adopting the same policies that are being adopted here in Northern California. And how about we start out with a few odds and ends and then we'll dive into some real heavy stuff.
Thank you very much, Deborah.
Okay, so I haven't talked about the report from Iron Mountain for a really long time. I really focus on silent weapons for quiet wars, but I'm reminded how important the report from Iron Mountain is. I'm just going to read a few things in the report from Iron Mountain, kind of set the stage. Oops, are we here?
Sorry about that, Deborah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so again, I'm going to talk about the report from Iron Mountain, set the stage for some directions we're going to go. But basically, the report from Iron Mountain, which is a free download, anyone can go online and download the report from Iron Mountain. But it's to determine the minimum and the optimum levels of destruction of life, property, and natural resources on the possibility and desirability of peace. So they say peace. We have been sadly misunderstanding their words. When they say peace, it's for their peace and security, not ours. They're running genocide programs on us, and we're going to get into a big one tonight. But also the report on page 5, it talks about the organized repression of minority groups and the reestablishment of slavery and the deliberate intensification of poisoning the air and water with pollution as part of a program leading to peace. The long-range planning and budgeting of the optimum number of lives to be destroyed annually in covert warfare is high in the report from Iron Mountain's priorities for government action. And on page 18, because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the establishment of the group that represents the report from Iron Mountain, and in the view of the nature of the report, they were not recommending that the report be released for publication. And it was their judgment that such release would not be in the public's best interest because uncertain advantages of public discussion about their conclusions and recommendations, in their opinion, were greatly outweighed by the clear and predictable danger of a crisis in public confidence with untimely publication of the report. So this report, again, was released right after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and Johnson, then president, got this report. He poo-pooed it. He said it was a hoax. It was never a hoax. So we're going to move from the report from Iron Mountain to the Genocide Treaty. Now, I'm hoping that many of you that are listening have already heard our YouTube. If you have not, I would recommend that you go to stopthecrime.net. Just scroll down from the home page. You'll see the YouTube icon, and you can watch and listen to the Genocide Treaty. If you want to just type it in your YouTube, you can type in Genocide Treaty, Deborah Tavares. The crux of the treaty is really phenomenal, and I think we talked about it in our last program on Granada Forum. But the bottom line of the treaty is this. The only thing that is illegal about genocide is that one's own country cannot kill its own people. And that's where it gets extremely important to understand that the United States is USA Inc. In fact, we are an Earth Inc. It's a massive corporation. It is run by corporations. It is not the country that sadly we have been led to believe that we have. This is how they're keeping us in check and keeping us contained, is through an illusion of a government that serves us. And I find this just in local legislation. An example, let me just give you an example, but I'm launching into a huge genocide pronouncement right now, but I'm going to just give you a local example on how the governments don't serve us. We went to the city, the local city here in Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa in Northern California is the town where the majority of homes burned during the October 2017 directed energy weapon assault, along with weather weapons, and of course along with blowing up the smart meters. And so there was a combination 1-2 punch here in Sonoma County and many counties throughout Northern California. There were about 170 fires that night, and they merged into a few big ones. So they were called maybe 4 or 5 fires, but they were a collection of many fires throughout many counties in Northern California. Of course, the same thing happened in Montecito and Santa Barbara. Weather weapons hit, and then, of course, the most rain California had followed the fires in Montecito, and then, of course, they were doused with too much rain in too short of a time, and then they were caught up in all of these horrific mud events and loss of life. What was interesting about Montecito, well, not interesting, but sad, was right after, within 2 weeks of the fires and floods in Montecito, the mayor announced the forming of a group called Resiliency. And resiliency is a word that is being bandied around now. It's an extension of the UN Agenda 21 policies. And it's important to understand what resiliency means, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but I want to get to the local understanding of seeing what happens. Now, here's, again, in Santa Rosa here in Northern California, the City Council, we filed a Freedom of Information request because the City of Santa Rosa is now deploying wireless water meters, replacing all of the original analog meters because they're claiming it reduces greenhouse gas emissions to not have meter readers using more energy to go around and read the meters. So they've added these collection towers in Santa Rosa, 4 different collection towers to serve the entire city of several 100,000 people, and they're changing out the water meters. So we requested a Freedom of Information Act. The request was something like, we wanted to see the environmental impact study that showed there was no negative impact due to the increased frequencies from these meters, these wireless meters, on humans, animals, or plants, and that there was also no increased structural impacts from the additionally pulsed frequencies because on the buildings and structures and bridges, because as we know, everything is energy, everything is a frequency, and we know that these rapidly increasing and layered frequencies that we're being smothered and bathed in is causing structural integrity, or actually structural problems in all structures, buildings, as I said, and bridges. So this was the response to that request. And here, I'm going to read this verbatim. It said, is she, now the she is me, is Deborah asking for an EIR that includes additional materials? And if so, there are none. The City of Santa Rosa did not perform an environmental impact report, but relied on previously available materials from the findings from the FCC and other institutions. Now, I want you to really think about this. The city is out there telling all the homeowners that lost their homes that they need and should be getting 2 and 3 cost to rebuild their homes. And the cities who sit on the councils, they are not electromagnetic frequency engineers or experts, and they're signing contracts with Verizon and Pacific Gas and Electric. They're bringing in all of these additional frequencies on top of the public, and they're not even equipped to understand what they're doing. And they're relying on outside agencies, the FCC, not even following their own advice, telling, where they should be getting and doing their own environmental impact study, and they're not. They're rolling in 5G and intensifying the small cell collection devices now in Santa Rosa. And there is a growing resistance now as people are understanding that the frequencies are only increasing. And Pacific Gas and Electric has also jumped in the fray. Of course, that is Rothschild. And again, I can't underscore enough, our utilities nationwide have Rothschild involvement in leadership across the board. This is why the United States utilities oppose the hardening up of the infrastructure that would assist us with going down by an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. It's Rothschild. We are wide open. China, Canada, other countries are hardened up. We are not. And it is because we have people that want to harden up the system, and they're going to Washington, D.C. with these plans and these requests to immediately harden up the system, and they're being met with a fictitious government, puppets that are only there for show, only there to divert our attention while the sludge rolls through the pipes. We don't have a system that works for us. It is a corporation. This is why the United States is sitting open and unprotected. It's because the intention is to cause massive, massive destruction, not only with the potential of wreaking havoc across the country and in different states with the power grid, but also with all the weaponized weather attacks that we're experiencing throughout the country. You don't have 70-degree temperature swings and consider that normal. You just don't have the types of things that are occurring for someone that does not want to believe all that is really happening. You just don't have these type of weather events. We're back into another drought here in Northern California. It just dumped in Santa Barbara, and a little bit of rain about 2 weeks after the fires, and since then, to date, we have about 12 inches of rain, and last year, granted it was a heavy rain year, we had 50-some-odd inches of rain, so that's a comparison of the conditions that we're being thrown into. So we see all of these things in local government. We see that local government is deferring to the large corporate network that runs the country. Our local governments don't run local government. They run systems that they are being given grants, and they accept the grant money, and then they're required to run the systems. The grant money and the grants require that they allow for public comment. So you will see such things in your local papers. The public is requested to comment on whatever it is that the city's working on. And you'll go to these meetings and you'll find that they'll give you 3 minutes, but if many people show up, they'll reduce your speaking time to 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute. They really are not wanting your comments. They don't adhere to your comments. Occasionally they will, very seldom, but that's simply to create the illusion that they're listening. By and large, we're rolled over because that's what they're there to do, to create the illusion of a functioning government. We're going to talk about ID 2020 and how that enormous ID program is also rolled into the illusion of voting, etc. It's a very sad reality that we find ourselves in. But I wanted to go into another genocide program, and everyone, I would request that you can download it for yourself from StopTheCrime.net. It is near the top of the homepage of StopTheCrime.net. At the very top, you're going to see the genocide YouTube in the center, and it's flanked on either side by a YouTube that discusses the origins of oil, that, of course, oil never came from dead dinosaurs. And on the opposite side of the genocide treaty, you will see the YouTube discussing primary water and the intention to try to fool us, as they did with fossil fuels and petroleum, and now trying to trick us into believing that there's limited water resources. And we'll talk about that more in a bit, because we're going to talk about 0 Day in Cape Town in South Africa. But I want to get into this document. Again, download it from the top of StopTheCrime.net, and it is entitled Population Engineering and the Fight Against Climate Change. Now, I'm going to go through it a little bit because there's so many topics to hit this evening. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to give you some high points and talk about it a little bit. Again, population engineering and the fight against climate change. It is all part of the Paris Peace Accord and the climate policies in Paris in 2014. And the question has been asked and now is being pushed that in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which of course is all phony, made-up science, that they are now agreeing that large portions of the population have to be exterminated. And a little about some of the authors of this document. There are many authors, but two of the authors in particular. One works for the National Institute of Health in the Department of Bioethics, and the other one works for Johns Hopkins University, also in the Bioethics Department. The Bioethics Department is a study of ethical issues emerging from advancement in biology and medicine and moral discernment as it relates to medicine policy and practices. And it's also, the bioethics is also concerned with ethical questions that arise in relationships among life sciences. So here are some of the high points of this population engineering and the fight against climate change. On the very first page, you will read that climate change is among the most significant moral problems contemporary societies face today in terms of its urgency, global expanse, and the multitude of its attending harms. Second, population plays an important role in determining just how bad climate change will be. I'm going to read that again. Population plays an important role in determining just how bad climate change will be. We've talked before about UN Agenda 21. It's known that it's just all about too many people using too much stuff. Well, climate change is the same thing. It's just really too many people using too much stuff. And the squeeze was on energy resources, renewable resources, and that has been the effort, and that's what we were talking about with the report from Iron Mountain, expending monies unnecessarily, in fact, wastefully spending monies, and fleecing people that will go and I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with decreasing your energy consumption, not at all. But it's being decreased, and the goal is they're aiming for zero. And there's no such thing as zero. And this is stated in this population engineering and fight against climate change. So again, they're telling us that the population, the numbers of the amount of people is going to determine just how bad climate change will be. And they say that the threats posed by climate change justify population engineering, aka eliminating people. On page 2, I found this to be exceedingly interesting because not that I have read all the documents that are available to read, but I've read a lot of documents, and I've never ever seen the word geoengineering in a document like this that would allude to weather warfare being used to eliminate the population. I've just never seen it. And again, there may be other documents, and if any of you have found them, I'd love to know. But on page 2, in the footnote, and it's a smaller font size, and it's one-space typing, and fortunately, we found this because it's not easy to catch. But on page 2, it says, along with the standard repertoire of broader policy efforts to fight climate change, which would include reducing consumption-related waste, switching to renewable energy sources, funding adaptation efforts, etc. And then there's a book they do refer to right here. It says, Why the Silence on Population? So they're talking about, why aren't they talking about overpopulation and reducing the population? And then it goes on. Even if population engineering has been largely overlooked, and this is just really very interesting. So even if population engineering has been largely overlooked in the climate change debate, unlike its ethological cousin, geoengineering. So what does ethological cousin mean? It means it's a good dramatic device, geoengineering, weather weapons, okay, a good dramatic device that often divides characters from what's really going on. And this is really the first time I've seen geoengineering used as part of the genocide program. And then it goes on. Many societies have policies and practices aimed at manipulating the size and structure of their populations for different ends. Immigration policies, for example, are often deployed in order to grow, shrink, or stabilize a national population for economic reasons. And they go on to say that they're thanking an anonymous reviewer for their helpful observations of above. And much of this document is beyond family planning. They do talk about infertility rates and increasing infertility rates, as well as encouraging couples not to have more than one child. In fact, they talk about in this policy how they will use advertising to show a family of three, husband and wife with a child, and they'll be showing that more as part of the PSYOPs planning of what a happy family looks like. This is all discussed in this document. But then they talk about that beyond the obvious harms, such as disease or drought, which is a second layer of less well-understood harms, which of course they do, they talk about geopolitical security impacts from the mass movement of potentially hundreds of millions of climate refugees, destitute citizens forced or pressured to abandon entire regions or even nations due to climate change. Now I want to pause for a moment and just look at this again. This is really important, and we're going to be leading into some substantial conversation around this, and this is very important to get. They go on to, they say, security impacts from mass movement of potentially hundreds of millions of climate refugees, destitute citizens forced or pressured to abandon entire regions or even nations due to climate change. And we're going to talk about this in more detail, but I don't want you to forget that. I want you to remember what that document said. But it goes on to, on page 5, it talks about, and this is a little confusing, and I'm going to break it down simply, but then I'm going to read exactly what it says in the document. On page 5, broken down simply, it says, global greenhouse gas emissions must decline to near zero or less. Now, I'm going to add this at this moment, and then I'm going to read it verbatim on page 5. There is no such thing as zero or less. The only ability for, I know, this is so pathetically horrific. The only way you get zero is if there are zero people, zero life. Sure. Okay? People aren't getting this. They're not getting this. They're not hearing it. So now I'm going to read why they're not hearing it on page 5, and I think you'll understand. It says this. According to the most recent estimates from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, in order to meet the 450 parts per million target of reduction that they talk about, the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they say global greenhouse gas emissions must steadily decline until they are 40 to 70% lower in 2050, that's 2050, than they were in 2010, and then continue to decline to near zero or less by the year 2100. So I want you to think about the wording of this sentence. Many people would be very confused. They would read, what do they mean? Decline steadily until they're 40 to 70% lower in 2050 than they were in 2010. This is a high math problem, right? You've got to think about, in 2050, our greenhouse gas emissions have to be 40 to 70% lower than it was in 2010. Now, we're being told continuously that we have a growing population. Well, obviously that's not the case because they're exterminating us quite rapidly. But then it says it's got to continue. Greenhouse gas emissions must decline to near zero or less by 2100. Now, most people would take a look at that, being confused with the sentence before, and think they don't get it, they don't understand it, and besides, the year 2100 is a long ways away. They're probably not going to be alive, and they don't need to really worry about it. They don't understand it. But when you really break it down simply, that greenhouse gas emissions must decline to near zero or less, don't put the dates in, don't put the percentages in, and just look at it that way because that is exactly what it's saying. So when they talk about zero waste and zero energy, which was a very interesting conversation that we had today. We went to a green energy group today that was presented by Pacific Gas and Electric and Sonoma Green Power. And it's really diabolical because, again, Pacific Gas and Electric is Rothschild. So anything at all that Pacific Gas and Electric is involved in, we know immediately it's reduction of people. I mean, bottom line, that's what it is. That's what this is all about. It's reduction of people. And we spent a few hours in this large forum talking to net energy use, zero energy. And we have new trash trucks driving all around Sonoma County now that they're called Ecology, and it says zero waste. So I went up and I asked him, now wait a minute, there is really no such thing as zero waste, so why is this word being bandied around and accepted? People just really aren't thinking this through. Seriously, they're not, because if you really think that through, zero waste is zero people. And you would think that people would be realizing that by now, but they're not. And here's what I discovered a long while back, actually, on zero waste. I think I even talked about it at a conference I attended in 2012 down in San Jose, and I think, Wendy, you were there. But on the government website, the U.S. Department of Energy, under the policy of energy efficiency and renewable energy on page 83, I found this. The real goal of energy use is aiming for zero. And this is what the energy efficiency from the U.S. Department of Energy has to say about aiming for zero. Sustainability is not the same thing as zero energy. There is no such thing as zero energy. Energy does not exist in a vacuum. It always comes from somewhere and goes somewhere. Because there is always a cost to energy, trade-offs are inevitable in order to find a harmonious balance that offers the greatest efficiency and least impact on the environment. Remember, it's all about the least impact on the environment. But here's the closing sentence on that page. This is the ultimate goal, to not use energy. The most efficient energy is energy we do not generate. This is not a technology. It is a behavior modification or learning to live in a new reality. I hope all of you are listening very carefully to this because the word speak and the trickery that is being bandied around now in all of our cities, build zero energy, zero waste, zero greenhouse gas emissions, it means you're zero. You don't exist anymore. and this is genocide. We're going to go on with this this document that I'm talking about, Population Engineering in the Fight Against Climate Change. On page 15, it says this: Earth cannot sustain larger populations of wealthier individuals. Now let's talk about that. They are meaning, of course, that wealthier societies use more energy, therefore create more greenhouse gas emissions. And this should bother all of you that are listening, because I think we are in the United States, and or maybe not. If you're in Europe, you're on the list, because it says here, why bother to reduce fertility in developing nations at all if the United States and other developed nations are the real problem? Then our efforts surely ought to focus exclusively on reducing their numbers. But this is all too simplistic. Many of the world's poor are becoming richer, and all the rest ought to become richer. It is both descriptively true that many of the world's poor will have higher per capita greenhouse gas emissions as a result of economic development over the next century. And it's true that they ought to be allowed to develop this way. But, remember, a but always negates the sentence before. But the details concerning climate change are demographics in the previous sections, and it makes it clear that Earth cannot sustain a significantly larger population of wealthier individuals. It goes on, reduction of a number of people with a small carbon footprint makes it less of a difference in the near term or the future. Fewer people with large carbon footprints are the bigger and larger problems. So they say that people, of course, have to have fewer children, and they are and have been eliminating the size of families by poisons, toxins, advertising, and the fact that economically it's costing families or families that have more children much more money, and they can't afford it. That's all been part of the plan. This has all been part of the plan of the economy. And it's important to understand that, just like with China, the one-child policy. As horrific as that is, it almost would seem to some of you that might be familiar with the horrific aspect of the Chinese government, and of course it is. I mean, if there's a second birth, I've heard that in some instances, maybe most, a second child will be removed from the family because they're not allowed to have more than one. But our children are being eliminated in the womb. And one of the quotes from the author of this document that I'm talking about says this, and I'm going to say this word carefully because when I first heard myself say it, it wasn't clear what it meant, but I'm going to say this carefully. Barren, B-A-R-R-E-N, barren wombs, W-O-M-B-S, as a cure for our climate catastrophe. In other words, no children, no mothers are the cure for the climate catastrophe. This is a quote by the philosophers that are behind announcing finally that they need to use weaponized weather, all the toxins and poisons, and they need to discourage through advertisements smaller families, and they need to kill us with diseases and all types of ravages, and that they know that they can move massive populations, millions of people, from one place to another because of climate weather weapons. Another one of these authors talks about, again, let's fight climate change with population reduction. So you're hearing a newer version of genocide. You heard me talk about the report from Iron Mountain, and that was in the 60s. This one is now. This one is right now. This is not that many years ago as Iron Mountain was. This is now. And people have misunderstood what the words are. A lot of people scratch their heads and they're not sure about climate change. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just all cooked up. Maybe it's a real problem. The real problem is that we are on the hit list under a plan that doesn't exist in reality. And it's the same thing as creating the illusion of fossil fuels. And for all of you that are listening, I would ask you to find out for yourselves about how far along your cities are in creating these policies in your town and making your homes and where you live a consequence of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You're going to need to know what they have in store for you because they are heading towards massive water rationing. Massive water rationing. Creating the illusion, just like with petroleum that never came from dead dinosaurs. They're creating the illusion that water is limited too. They're telling us we have a water crisis. So before I move into water, again, I would request and urge you to all download the Population Engineering and the Fight Against Climate Change, again, at the top of stopthecrime.net. Understand this is just another form of genocide representing itself under a false science. And we must get our kids out of school. They're required here in California to be vaccinated. But worse, they're all being taught that climate change is a reality. And we have very depressed kids, very depressed. They're moving forward through school learning that they are just too much. The earth cannot support them. And that is a very sad reality for our children to be allowed to feel. It's really up to us to educate them about the truth. The truth is far more important than to allow them to be kept in lies. At least that's certainly what many people believe. And to be in school and to learn false realities doesn't serve our future generations, if we have future generations, quite frankly. But with the increased frequencies that are bathing us, that is probably one of the very most important things I could say to everybody that's listening right now is to understand how huge the increased bathing of frequencies are and what it's going to mean to all of us. We did an interview, and I've talked about it many times. I can't underscore it enough. It's called The Cooking of Humanity, when we interviewed Barry Trower from the UK. And we're specifically talking to him about a document that we found on the whitehouse.gov website. And it was only about a 14 or so page document. And we do discuss that document in the YouTube Cooking of Humanity. And essentially what you will see is a map of the United States, and you'll see frequencies on all of the abutment of the United States against waterways or oceans, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic, the Gulf states, etc. And what that is representing is the use of psychotronic weapons systems on all of us right now, and literally the control of all of us through AI and psychotronic systems. What lies ahead for all of us is nothing short of... I am reminded of a deadly computer game that has gone live, and it looks like that from every level, from local government to this horrific weaponized directed energy weapon targeting of Northern California. In fact, since I think the last time I've been on Granada Forum, I attended a meeting here in Northern California that some of the legislators in Sacramento were there. They had Pacific Gas and Electric there, representatives, also from Southern California Edison or Edison International, all a.k.a. Rothschild, and San Diego Gas and Electric. They were all here in Santa Rosa at the City Council chambers. and they were being asked really tough questions about the fires. And we were there. We filmed the whole thing. We will be putting that up on YouTube. It's a very lengthy amount of footage, though. It's about 3.5 hours. But we heard the unimaginable. And what we heard was never printed in the papers. And had we not been there, we would have never known what I'm going to tell you now. What we discovered during that meeting, and also the California Public Utility Commission was there. Now, you're hearing me only talk about California, but these types of things exist in your state as well, because Rothschild is embedded in your utilities as well, and your utility commissions also serve Rothschild. They literally look and appear that they're a regulatory body. They're not. Rothschild regulates the California Public Utility Commission. A couple of things happened here in Northern California before the fires. Pacific Gas and Electric raised their energy rates. In fact, energy rates are being raised across the country right now for anticipated increased weather weapons being used on you, all of us. So they're raising their rates so they can make a lot of money while putting us in likely fleeing, becoming climate refugees, as I was reading to you earlier. What is happening here in Northern California is just a microcosm of what's happening to all of you, as I'm saying. And so what was said at this meeting? Well, a couple of things. The night that the fires started on October 8th of 2017, Pacific Gas and Electric and CAL FIRE. Now, we're not talking about the CAL firefighters that were on the front lines trying to contain a fire that burned hotter and faster than any fire they've ever fought, ever. Battalion chiefs here in Santa Rosa told us they were helpless and hopeless. They watched the fire descend on them like a wave crashing onto the beach, but it wasn't water, it was fire. The winds were being whipped up so high, the garage doors landed in trees 40 feet high. The fire engines that would drive through the neighborhoods trying to save the neighborhoods were just hit and pelted with everything that was flying everywhere. And then, of course, in those areas, after the fires burned through, there was nothing there to fly because everything was absolutely disintegrated. It looked like a bomb dropped on everything. But what we heard in that meeting is that CAL FIRE and both Pacific Gas and Electric could have and should have de-energized the system. They could have turned off the power, and they didn't. They did not de-energize the system. And the smart meters were, and this will never be part of the conclusion of the cause of these fires, but we know that the smart meters burn down homes. You can type in smart meter fires. You'll see thousands of homes that burn down with improperly attached smart meters or pulsed frequencies to the smart meter. The night before the fires really took hold here, Santa Rosa was having trouble with one of their main water stations. They were getting pulsed frequencies from the electric grid serviced by Pacific Gas and Electric. And the Santa Rosa workers for that district went there and took that system offline from Pacific Gas and Electric and used their backup generators because of the brownouts, the pulsed frequency delivery. Pacific Gas and Electric was pulsing the system that night, along with the fact that they admitted beforehand, over 3 years ago, we found those emails between Rothschild, both agencies, the Public Utility Commission and Pacific Gas and Electric, saying they would use a satellite laser. They said on Sebastopol, but that's in Northern California, and they use the lasers here in Northern California. You can read and see those emails for yourself. You can watch the plan to burn up Northern California, and that, again, was about 3 years ago. I did that program with Jeff Rentz on the Jeff Rentz Radio Show that night, and someone else captured one of the plans in a shorter YouTube called UN Agenda 21, the plan to burn up Northern California. Now, that's shorter, and many of you may decide you want to watch the shorter version, but you will not hear the second plan to burn up Northern California by selecting UN Agenda 21, the plan to burn up Northern California. But UN Agenda 21, the plan to burn up Northern California, you can see the email exchange between Pacific Gas and Electric and the California Public Utility Commission. The longer plan talks about the second plan to burn further north than the firestorm that hit our area. It will burn the Humboldt area, the Mendocino area, likely take out all the coastal cities along the beautiful northern coast. Mendocino, Humboldt, and the northern tip of Sonoma County is involved in this potential targeting. And so what do I mean by that? Well, for years, the Board of Supervisors in Mendocino have been pleading with Sacramento to require the Fisher family. The Fisher family is a family out of San Francisco that owns Gap, Old Navy, I think it's the Fairmont Hotel, and they own a seat at the government's table. In fact, they're a large portion of the government's table. They also fund a lot of climate policies. Basically, they're a land grab company. But they bought a lumber yard years ago with hundreds of thousands of acres. And they started a program to eliminate the tan oak trees because they said the reach of the branches of the tan oak trees prevented the timber from growing up underneath the tan oak trees. So they hired undocumented laborers to start a program called Gash and Squirt. And what they did was they gashed the trunks of the trees and squirted poison in the gashes and have left millions and millions of trees standing to die. The fire chiefs up in Mendocino County have gone to the board in Mendocino County relentlessly. You'll find we've documented all the documents. We've pulled the meeting minutes off of the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors. We have the letters from the fire chiefs. We have letters from the citizens up there that are horrified because literally, as I said, there are millions and millions of dead trees. And the fire chiefs are saying this is going to cause an enormous fire because all these trees are going to be a lower layer of lattice and a ladder for these fires to just burn. And, of course, with all the heavy chemtrailing and all the heavy metals, it's going to burn faster and hotter, just as we have seen all of our fires burn faster and hotter because of the combustibility of all the heavy metals on the ground and all the dead trees. So these trees today as we're talking are still there. They're still dead and dying. And that area is waiting to be burned. And the state is doing nothing. The only thing that the Fisher family's attorney offered the concerned residents was evacuation routes. Evacuation routes. So that's the second plan. So when you listen to the plan to burn up Northern California, understand there are two distinct plans. The other one just has not happened yet. And we have been told here by our governor in California that we are at a new normal of climate change. We're going to have many more fires. In fact, I hear a break coming up.
Yep, yeah, we have a break coming up. We'll be right back with Deborah Tavares, and don't go anywhere. And this is Granada Forum Radio Program. This is Revolution Radio, ladies and gentlemen. Hold on. We'll be right back with my co-host, Nick Pearson, and our producer, Richard Kane. Hold on.
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
My mind lately.
Okay, we're live, guys. We're back.
And Deborah, can you possibly mention that
guys,
the stuff that we're
air.
eating, where we can find it, that Simtex, or what's it called?
Sure, yeah, sure.
Thanks. Unbelievable show. I just want you to know, I'm just absolutely blown away, just freaked out. Phenomenal.
Okay, we're on air, guys.
Okay, welcome back to the Granada Forum Radio Program, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you've enjoyed the first hour with Deborah Tavares. We're going to go right back into her right now and get as much information as we can. So, Deborah?
Well, thank you, Wendy, for, again, having me on the show. There's just always so much to talk about, and I know that there's been some interest in how people can locate the Cinemix that we have on the website. Cinemix is spelled S-E-N-O-M-Y-X. Again, S as in Sam, E-N as in Nellie, O-M-Y-X. Let me tell you how I found out about Cinemix. A number of years ago, I was on a radio show out of Mexico City, and I didn't know the host. I had never been on the show before. But I was talking about smart meters and the deployment of smart meters and the genocidal aspect of smart meters, the control in our homes, the increased frequencies, the surveillance, all of these kinds of things. And in between one of the breaks, off air, the host asked me, said, Deborah, so what do you think of Cinemix? And I had never heard of Cinemix. I did not know what he was talking about, and I did not know this man. And so he told me what it was, and I could really hardly do the rest of the show. Number one, I thought maybe he was nuts because I didn't know him. And number two, if what he said was true, it was diabolical. And I had to go back into talking about smart meters. So let me tell all of you right now what I learned that day and then what I found out to be the truth about Cinemix. They add this to many beverages and foods, and we don't want to be eating it. So what is it? It's aborted fetuses that they use in our food supply. And what happened was there was a lawsuit by a Rights for Life group that did not believe that aborted babies, once alive people, should be used in the food supply. And so they filed a lawsuit, and the decision was delivered on February 28th of 2012. Now, you're going to hear me say the Obama administration, but it doesn't matter. This is just, and was at the time, PepsiCo is actually creating Cinemix. It's cannibalizing aborted fetuses, as I said, and the lawsuit termed this as ordinary business. And the shareholders would not be informed or allowed to vote on the resolution. So in Largo, Florida, in a shocking decision, again delivered on February 28th of 2012, President Obama's Security and Exchange Commission ruled that PepsiCo's use of aborted fetal remains in their research and development agreement with Cinemix to produce flavor enhancers falls under ordinary business operations. So what you're going to find listed in the ingredients in the various products that Cinemix is added to, it's just called natural ingredients. So you will never know that you're cannibalizing. But what does cannibalizing do? It's certainly part of a ritual of society, of the global elites. It's a ritual sacrifice that we're all engaging in if we eat these products. And it adds increased anger in society in general. And we also, and I don't know quite how to explain all of this, Dr. Bill Deagle explained it perfectly, but it also changes our brain function when we cannibalize. So with that in mind, you may all be wondering, well, what on earth do they put Cinemix in? And again, you can download the flyer on stopthecrime.net. Just type in Cinemix. But I'll just list a few things that were part of this lawsuit and the products, some of the products that are sold using Cinemix. So the PepsiCo, in fact, you can type in PepsiCo, PEPSICO products. Now, not all of their products, I assume, have this in it, but here are some of them. Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Aquafina, juices like Tropicana, Dole, Ocean Spray, Lipton Tea, Quaker Oats cereals and granola bars, Frito-Lay chips, Doritos, Cheetos, Gatorade, coffee, Seattle's Best Coffee, Cadbury Adams products, Kraft Foods now include chewing gum, Trident, Dentyne, Clorets, Chiclets, Hall's Lozenges, Cadbury chocolates. The list is long, and I'll read just a few more. You need to download this flyer for yourself. Take it with you when you go shopping. I know many people were a few years ago when we learned about all of this, so that they wouldn't buy these items like Maxwell House Coffee, Nabisco crackers, Philadelphia cream cheese, also honey maple log cabin syrup, Miracle Whip cream, Nestle products that include Nescafé and Classic Coffee, Decaf, Taster's Choice. The list is very long. It's extremely disturbing, and I'm sure that all of you that are listening would not want to be unknowingly cannibalizing. And certainly, you know, you have to think about the rights for life and the desire not to abort, which, of course, falls under genocide, really getting into the abortion, but also the market that's created with all the aborted fetal tissue and babies being put into the food supply.
Deborah, if I can, was like the whole thing with the mad cow disease like an experiment to see if this would actually work?
Well, the mad cow disease, of course, was feeding cows to cows.
Right.
And you know, they're decimating us through our food supply. You don't feed dead animals to live animals. You don't feed dead humans to humans. But we're so far beyond what seems right and real and true that when I hear myself talking about this now, so many years later, and of course this still exists, what I now know, it's just a layer of something that it can hardly put words to. I mean, I'm sure those of you that are listening can hardly put words to this. I can hardly put words to the enormity of the evil that exists. Really is enormous. And I tell people to live really one day at a time and to try to find as much love and joy in your immediate families and in creating community. Certainly all of us need to prepare and prep. We need to do as much we need to create as much self-reliance within our communities as we possibly can, because the weather weapons are increasing. They're becoming far more diabolical. We're looking at earthquakes that they create. The NASA War document is a really horrific document. We've talked about that for years. You can go through the pages. We've spent years going through that document and talking with military people on defining the acronyms and figuring out what everything means as best we can in that document. It was delivered by a chief NASA scientist out of the Langley Research Center just only 2 months before 9/11 as a PowerPoint. So we've done a lot of research behind that document, and that is part of the research that actually went into a YouTube that we have up on stopthecrime.net, and I can't underscore enough for you to take a look at this YouTube. And it's called Flu, Biological Weaponized Attack. Flu, Biological Weaponized Attack. And understand that in the NASA War document, they talk about the experiments that they did to create airborne varieties of germ warfare and how they experimented back in World War II on the Seventh-day Adventist. They wanted to support the war, but they didn't want to be on the battlefield, so they were commissioned to be in an experiment. And we talk about that. And it's horrific. It's horrific what has occurred and all the experimentation that has happened. In fact, one of the things that prompted us to disclose as many things as we could find, and which is what we have been doing for a long time now, is, and you'll hear me talk about that in Flu, a biological weaponized attack. And I hold the document up. It's a couple inches thick. We received an email many years back talking about how Congress had given the Department of Defense the authority to use chemical weapons on the American population, chemical and biological weapons on the American population without our knowledge or consent. And at the time, I saw it, but I didn't fully understand the scope and the enormity of what that read, or what that said. But I was in Pasadena area in Southern California during the late 80s when they were spraying us with malathion. There were black helicopters, I remember 3 or 4 abreast, just spraying everything. And they told us, they warned us prior to this, to cover your cars, cover your patio furniture, anything with paint, because it could destroy the paint. And people just watched them fly overhead, not ever imagining that this was part of an experiment that was allowed by the Department of Defense to use chemicals and biologicals on the American civilian population, as I said, without our consent. So that was just a small portion of what we started to understand. And we actually went to Washington, D.C. years back to the Records Department and looked up some of these things. And we had an emergency meeting with family and friends and said, if we pull these documents out of the document department in D.C., then our lives have changed forever. And our lives changed forever. Suddenly the life that we were led to believe that we were having in the United States of America was not at all what we realized and began to understand what we were having. So it was a long process, and so when you hear me on radio shows or talking about things, understand it's been many years that we've been researching and discovering these aspects of our reality. And I'm going to say this now because I need to. Rosalind Peterson was very important to me. She was someone that had a website called California Skywatch. And I spent many, many years, and in the beginning, many days, talking to Rosalind about the weaponized weather, which I, at the time, didn't know as much as I now know about weather. Rosalind passed away on February 4th of this year, and I just only recently found out. And we had Rosalind down to a meeting that we had 2 years ago. We're actually going to put that up on YouTube as a tribute to her, because she was telling us at this meeting she was taking care of her 99-year-old mother. And they lived in Northern California, and we'd been up to Rosalind's home a number of times, had met her mother, and talked with her, and she took us on field trips through the wooded area there to show us the results of all of the heavy spraying and all the trees that were dying, and took us on field trips. And when she came down in October of 2015 and spoke with us, it was not about weather modification or geoengineering or anything to do with her website, California Skywatch, or the Agricultural Defense Coalition. It was about her mother, and it was about what she had learned in going to the hospital with her 99-year-old mother, who insisted she would never go into the hospital. And again, we're going to put this up on YouTube as a tribute to Rosalind and as a warning to all of you with what she learned about not leaving anyone you love or care about alone at all in the hospitals. And you will hear her when we get this up on stopthecrime.net, and I would suggest that you subscribe, and then you'll get this when we blast it out. She talked about what happens in the wee hours in the hospitals and how the hospital staff comes in, does all kinds of unnecessary tests, and gives people shots, flu shots, all kinds of unnecessary and deadly types of medications. And Rosalind went at great length in this discussion with us to tell us about some drugs that they had administered to one of her mother's friends that was also in their 90s. And she pulled up the information about this particular drug, and it was called a terror bioweapon. And it had 65 pages of things it did when it was injected as a shot. And I'll just tell you that Rosalind's mother's friend had gone into the hospital for a urinary tract infection and was given this shot. So I would ask all of you to, again, subscribe to stopthecrime.net so you can hear Rosalind's warning. Rosalind would have wanted all of you to know about this and protect your loved ones when you go into the hospital. Now, to that, I want to add a few things. Many of you may know, many of you may not know, but out of Stanford University, they're now using AI, artificial intelligence, to assess people when they're admitted into the emergency room at the hospital. So what does that mean? Well, AI can look through all of your records. AI will determine what type of medical modality you've chosen. In other words, if you've been someone that has adhered to the American Medical Association's compliance of treatment, AI is going to diagnose you if you've had your shots and all these kinds of things, and you come in with a problem. You will be diagnosed on the chances of your survivability and whether or not life-saving care should be given to you. Because the idea behind this is that too many doctors spend too much time and money trying to keep dead and dying people alive. And they should just let them go, but the doctors are timid with telling the family or the person you're going to die. So they don't. They treat them, and they over-treat them. Well, AI is going to help the doctors make that decision and will direct that person upon admitting into the emergency room, whether they get treatment or whether they go right in to hospice care. So all I can tell everybody that's listening, you want to be very careful. Your medical records are going to direct how they kill you in the hospital or if they kill you in the hospital. And this is crucial. And this is the place that we are now, the determination being left up to AI on whether we live or die or get treatment or not. But I want to go into something that you need to know about. It's something that I've been discovering more and more about. I didn't know. And what didn't I know? I didn't know how horrific LED lights and the lighting that is now required in the United States through the Department of Energy is on our eyes and on our sleep and on our health. I didn't know. And how I found out was I went to a city council meeting. And PG&E, again, I've said to you, anything that your utility is involved in isn't good, sinister. Or any corporation, most corporations are sinister. But PG&E was backing a pilot program. I want you to remember something. Whenever you hear a pilot program, it's not a pilot program. You immediately think they're going to try it, they're going to test it out, they're going to see if they're going to go ahead with it. No. They're creating the illusion that it's a small little deployment when they use the word deployment too with pilot. So PG&E comes to the city and they say, we're going to pay for some LED street lighting for the city, and you won't be charged for it. Well, during the meeting it's discovered that actually the city was going to be charged for it. It would be part of their billing in time. So PG&E gave the city misinformation. But what had occurred that night is some people knew that this was on the agenda, and they did their research on LED lighting. And what PG&E was offering was not only LED lighting, but dimmable lighting. And that would mean that there needs to be a method in which it can be dimmed, a.k.a. wireless. Another wireless attachment to our street lights. And the street lights are far more than just lights. But let's talk about...
Can I ask a quick question here? When they did the meeting, did they use the Delphi technique and already have the answer to the end of the meeting already prescribed and just gave the public the idea that they actually had public input on it?
Well, that is how all meetings are handled, but they did not use the Delphi in this meeting. It was a meeting at the City Council, and Pacific Gas and Electric, 2 representatives were there, and there were probably about 10 people there that lived within the community that were putting forth documents and evidence from the American Medical Association. Now, this city, in some respects, believes that they really do need to serve the people. It's a very small city. It's not a large city like Santa Rosa or the county of Sonoma or some of our larger cities that you are probably in. This is a small city. And it is a city that has been on the forefront of being aware of the frequencies from the smart meters. So it is a city that has had tremendous activism over a dozen years against frequencies. So this city is very, very much aware of frequencies. And so I'm glad you asked if it was the Delphi technique, because oftentimes that's what it is. But I want to throw in another word about that, and then I'll go continue on with the lighting. But the biggest thing that I found out in regards to the Delphi technique is the word consensus. Anytime you read consensus decision, you need to understand what that word means. For an example, I wanted to get on a citizens advisory group about water. And they said, Deborah, if you are selected or if you're able to be in this group, you have to agree on one thing. This has to be your agreement going into this advisory group. You have to agree with the majority of the group's decision, whether you disagree with them or not. In other words, I have to concede my thinking to the majority of the group. Now, when you look this up and you look at groupthink and you look at intelligent, smart, educated people conceding their opinion to a group, that is dangerous. And that has been in the forefront of how these decisions through the Delphi technique are made. This is how it's made. And it is a preconceived, predetermined policy that people are invited to engage in, believing that there is citizen input, but they hire consultants, out-of-town consultants, to lead these groups. Typically, you'll see easels up in front of the room. You'll see what is called a facilitator, and you'll see these people that are thinking that they're putting input into the group sitting around round tables. Now, I've seen this type of meeting on everything I've attended, even including IEEE, Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And we have a YouTube up. It's called IEEE Technology Future Death Trap. And I talk about the Delphi technique being used on these engineers that were flown to San Jose, this is several years back now, from all over the world. The Delphi technique is a standard meeting practice. But in cities, during the council meetings, you don't get the easels by and large, and you just get the opportunity during public comment to speak as they put forth different items on the agenda. So that evening, PG&E was talking about the benefit of these streetlights, and there were quite a few people there talking about the night glare in their homes when these lights were put in front of their homes, that even blackout drapes were not keeping all this bright light out. And so after doing quite a bit of research, I found that IEEE, Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, had written a paper understanding LEDs, and they were sending that to the Department of Energy with the conclusion that LEDs were dangerous. So why are they dangerous? Well, let's talk about LEDs and the flicker rate. 1 in every 1,000 people, because of the flicker rate, will have a seizure. They won't know it's from the light. And what will they do? They'll go get some type of drug for seizures, anti-seizure medication. When you know that the flicker rate of LED lights causes seizures, again, in 1 out of every 1,000 people, that's an enormous number of people that are affected by the flicker rate alone. Now, I just picked this up a couple of days ago from an ophthalmologist from the office, and I would recommend that all of you look into this. Certainly, I recommend that you listen to our YouTube called LED Lights, a Silent Weapon Assault. LED Lights, a Silent Weapon Assault. This is what it is. It is being, this type of lighting is being deployed throughout the world, not just the United States through the Department of Energy, for the sake of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, aka literally eliminating all the original incandescent lights. But this is all part of a genocide program. As trivial as lighting may seem, here's what it does. And these are on some brochures that I picked up at the ophthalmologist department just the other day. It says, Technology's Sinister Side. Protect your vision for a lifetime. They go on to say that thanks to ever-present electronics, we are exposed to an increasing level of harmful blue light on a daily basis. Computers, monitors, laptops, tablets, smartphones, LED TVs, even compact fluorescent CFL bulbs emit it. Cumulative exposure to blue light can suppress melatonin and disrupt your natural sleep cycle. It may also lead to eye strain, headaches, blurred vision, macular degeneration, cataracts, leading cause of blindness.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned headaches, because I tell you what, every time I go into a room where people have put LED lights on, I do get a headache. Same thing that I used to get when I get near a microwave if it's running.
Well, I'm not done.
Okay. Well,
I'm not done.
I'm sure I got that in there, because I'm telling you, what you're talking about, I've already experienced.
Well, we're going to continue so that you know more and so that you can warn more people.
Please do.
And, yeah, because it's important when we're just out and about to, at any and every opportunity, talk to people. Gosh, I'm sad that they're using LED.
It really does sound like those late night commercials where they're like pushing the new pharmaceutical drug, and they said, "Well, here's the list of side effects that go along with it."
Right. Well, here's what they say. They say in this one brochure, "Is your child at risk?" And they say, hunched over a smartphone, an e-reader, tablet, or a game console, children tend to hold devices closer, and their larger pupils let in more blue light. This may put them at higher risk for developing sleep disorders, behavioral problems such as ADHD, obesity, and vision loss. The good news is that you don't have to eliminate all of these devices. There are affordable protections, and this is important. This is what we're going to talk about after we go through a few more of the side effects. Another brochure says this: blue light, a health threat hiding in plain sight. And it says, do you use a computer regularly? Do you typically watch a widescreen TV? Do you check your cell phone frequently? Do you use LEDs and CFL lighting to save energy? Another one says this: potential impact of blue light, and this talks about the vision aspect. Tired eyes, sensitivity to light and sensitivity to night vision, loss of sharp contrast of vision, difficulty seeing at night. Hearing a lot of people talking about that, because a lot of the headlights are LED lights too now in the cars, and a discomforting glare. The health aspects: fatigue, difficulty staying focused, difficulty falling or staying asleep, headaches, increase in migraines, behavioral issues in children. And then they talk about the risks: risk of early onset cataracts, risk of macular degeneration, increased risk of diabetes, and increased risk of obesity. Now, these are just little trifold folders that I picked up at the ophthalmologist just the other day. But I would urge everyone to look at more information that we have in the YouTube. LED lights, a silent weapons assault. Our eyes are being attacked. We have nearsightedness. And the decrease of melatonin is another reason, on top of the frequencies that we're being hit with at night, is another reason we're not getting the sleep we need to combat all of the immune attacks that we're facing through the genocide plan to reduce the population. So I would really, really recommend that everybody look at reducing the use of frequencies, their cell phones, their smart tablets, all of this. Be hardwired minimally, but reduce the use. There are special glasses you can order online, and you can ask your ophthalmologist when you renew your next eyeglass prescription about a special lens that they can add to your prescription to help reduce the blue light. And I never knew that. I never knew that they had blue tech lenses that you could add to your prescription glasses. So everybody that
I was going to say, when you look through these lenses, do you see the signs that say obey? And this is your God.
Yeah, I know. It's diabolical, and it's unbelievable, all of the methodologies, all of the ways in which they are destroying us, costing us money, having all of us enjoy life less. Nearsightedness is an enormous problem here in the United States. We're eating far too much flour and sugar, far too much gluten. If we reduce our use on cell phones and all of the wireless technologies, those of you that can, get the smart meter taken off your house, because they do have this new at-time-of-rate billing coming in now across the country. We will all be charged much more money when we use our electricity in our homes from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. I discovered this in all the utilities in California, and I checked a few other states, and it is a time-of-use increase. I haven't checked all the states, so those of you that are listening, you may want to check with your utility and find out if they are planning to change their rates based at time of use. Now, here in Northern California, Pacific Gas and Electric is saying the most insane thing about rate increase. They're saying it's a pilot program to see the effectiveness of increasing the rate.
Right. And what did you say about pilot programs?
Yes, you heard me. Anytime anybody hears pilot programs, you've got to know it's not a pilot program. It's a slow incremental change across the board. And thank you for bringing that up. But I would recommend that everybody go on to stopthecrime.net and download our symptoms list. It's called Health Symptoms from All Wireless Devices, including military weaponization of the atmosphere, a component of the chemtrails.
Because
many of the same ailments are the same. We're suffering the same kinds of things. And just keep this list handy. Understand that when you start feeling these things, your doctor's going to prescribe pharmaceuticals for you. And what's AI going to do when you're admitted in a time of trauma into the hospital? Well, depending on what your drug load is, you may not be allowed to have life-saving opportunities. So it's really up to all of us now individually to understand how to take care of ourselves, not rely on this fraudulent medical association that has brought up doctors to kill us slowly, administer drugs, and all of these kinds of things. We attended a health function in San Jose a number of years ago. We ended up in a breakout group, a huge table with about 20 people. And I talk about this. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what video I talk about this, because certainly I was reporting on it a few years ago at the time, and I could remember it much better. But still, the bottom line of that meeting, that we were sitting around this table of 20 doctors, was it was a pharmaceutical meeting, and they were talking about rebranding, and they were rebranding pharmaceuticals to be known as food. That was the idea. To be known as food.
What kind of pharmaceuticals were they trying to rebrand as food?
All of them. And at that meeting, I'm trying to think of the name of the YouTube that I have this conversation on. They also talked about how they had some ships offshore, actually 3 miles out, which puts it in international water off of San Diego.
I thought it was 12 miles.
3 miles out, and that's what I recall. And that they were doing human experiments on these ships. And I was just sitting there, Lou and I were sitting there taking all of this in. I must have worn a white jacket or something. I don't know how on earth who they thought we were. but they were being very candid and talking about these things. But having said that, I think it's extremely important that everyone understand it's up to each one of us to take care of ourselves. Again, I can't underscore the fact of not eating flour and sugar. Don't eat Cinnamix, of course. Certainly eliminate gluten. Check with your, I don't know, I hate to even say check with your doctor, but because I think I need to, go check with your doctor. He's probably fat and overweight and sick too. But
yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that before, where this doctor who's fat and overweight and has got diabetes is trying to give you health advice.
Right. Well, yeah, isn't that the way, the American medical way? It's all false education. These doctors don't have any nutritional training at all. So I would recommend that people certainly start taking charge of their health.
Right.
Doing all you can.
Is that video that you have, is that available on your website?
Which video are you referring to?
The one you talked about when these guys going off 3 miles off the coast and
yes, I was talking about it back then.
Okay.
On one of the YouTubes that we have up. I'm sad to say that for the moment I can't think of it. Honestly, we have just been going to meetings around the clock here.
Okay.
And I have never been so worn out. I want to say a couple additional things.
Okay.
That are really horrific, and everybody needs to hear this. There's an area here in Northern California that was completely burned out. It was called Fountain Grove. It was a very wealthy community up above the Hilton Hotel. The Hilton Hotel was burned to the ground, and that's the area where the fires jumped the freeway, the 101 freeway, and then burned down this middle-class family area of about 1,500 homes, but it decimated Fountain Grove. Fountain Grove is considered a very, very wealthy area. The homes start at about $1 million and go up to many millions of dollars, and it's pretty much obliterated. There's maybe only 5% of the homes left, and there's nothing there. It looks like a war zone. It is the most horrific thing to drive through and see. We have a number of friends who lost their homes in that area. Besides the fact that everybody that lost their homes still must pay their mortgages, still must pay their insurance. They can't let their insurance lapse or they won't renew the insurance, and mortgage requires that you have insurance. So they have to pay their mortgage, they have to pay their insurance, and if they're in a homeowners association, which many of them are, they have to pay their homeowners dues, and they have to pay prorated property taxes. So the property taxes are being assessed based on the date that their house was lost, and then they pay for the land value on the prorations. So they have all of those payments to make. But there's an area in Fountain Grove of 324 homes. It's just one section of Fountain Grove, which we sadly now call Fountain Grave because it doesn't really exist anymore. There were 324 homes there, and there are a few homes that were left standing. And it was discovered because the people were having a horrible taste in their water and a horrible smell of the few people that were still there living in their homes. They discovered benzene in the water supply. And this is cancer-causing. It's a result of melted plastic, and they're claiming that the fire burned so hot that it melted the infrastructure of the underground water system. And so the few homes that are there, they're on a don't drink it, boil it order. Don't drink it and don't boil it order. And the city is supplying them with bottled water. Now you're going to see on YouTube a short clip of a city council meeting that we attended and what we said to the city council about the ridiculous, horrific fact that they would deliver bottled water to these people and tell them to take cold showers. Your body is your largest organ, and they're suggesting that people wash themselves with benzene, cancer, and that they wash their dishes in the dishwasher, and they don't water their plants outside because the benzene will leach into the groundwater table. And they're letting these people live up there. But
how can you possibly... Go ahead. I apologize.
What's worse than that, if that is not bad enough, is I heard at a water meeting last week, and this is going to be up on YouTube. This is diabolical. I heard that the city will issue rebuilding permits to those 324 homes, but they won't issue occupancy permits, and that it will take 4 to 6 years at least for them to figure out what happened with the benzene and to literally redo the water infrastructure up there so the houses can connect to the water infrastructure. Now, because we were land developers and builders, I was aghast when I heard this at the meeting. So what did I hear and what did I think? Again, they would issue rebuilding permits to those properties that burned down, but they would not issue occupancy permits. So let's talk about this. What does this mean? And here's also what they said at the meeting. They weren't clear what lenders would say about getting financing for these people if they weren't going to get an occupancy permit. Now, let me explain this to you. As a builder, if I were pulling a building permit, I would never, ever think that if I met the requirements to be issued a building permit, that I would not be given an occupancy permit, only unless it did not comply to what had been agreed upon to build. Here, the builders would not normally ask, well, gee, will you issue an occupancy permit? It would be assumed. Now, let's look at this. A lot of these people are underinsured. They don't have enough money to rebuild. They're going to likely start reconstruction with what insurance money they have. Maybe they're a few $100,000 short of rebuilding, maybe more. They're going to use what money they've been given through their insurance company to rebuild. They're going to be short. They're going to go to a construction, to a mortgage company wanting the additional monies to finish construction. And because they're going to be in a benzene area without being able to get an occupancy permit, they're not going to get a loan. Now, I said this to about 200 people at a meeting 2 nights ago, what the city said. And I told them how to find this meeting that I heard this in. And I think that, sadly, these people are so traumatized because you have to remember the night of October the 8th and October the 9th, these people were getting out of their homes because neighbors were pounding on their doors, getting them up. There was no emergency alert system. The hydrants up in Fountain Grove, there was no water. And the houses were blowing up one after another in a firestorm. And on top of that, the ugliness of what's happening here, and I'm only saying this because this is happening in areas that are being hit with weather weapons. When weather weapons are used and directed energy weapons are used, you know there's boots on the ground that are evil. You know that people are going to be taken advantage of and asset stripped. But what this is ultimately leading to are resilient cities. Where they're creating climate refugees, people that will not be able to really rebuild. And they're going to be moved into some of these projects now that are being approved. We're seeing many, many projects being built, for example, in Hollywood or in Santa Monica or Los Angeles. And they're high towers of apartments. And there's mixed use down below. And I got to thinking about this as a builder. How on earth can these buildings, by and large, stand vacant with nobody living in them? As a builder, we could never have afforded building out a project and letting it sit, not selling it right away and getting occupants and getting the loan off of our back. But there are literally thousands of buildings and units sitting vacant. So let's think about that. I started thinking about the ghost cities that I researched a few years ago in China, and they still exist today. They're building mega cities in the middle of nowhere in China. And they are going to move about 450 million people in China by the year 2025 into these cities. They started moving a few 100,000 rural country farmers by gunpoint a couple of years ago. These farmers did not want to move into these cities. They wanted to stay on their land. So many of them torched themselves. And then in many instances, they had to put suicide nets around some of these multi-story apartments. What they told these people, these farmers, is they'll give them a free apartment if they just leave their land. And then they were told that they would have health care and education, and that they might get a job at a factory in these ghost cities. Now, keeping in mind there's no economic infrastructure there yet, and they're moving all these people that were self-reliant, didn't need government, and that was the problem.
Was Bernie Sanders running for office there?
What is happening in China, let me just finish this a bit so people understand what's happening in China. Okay, so these farmers are being shoved off their lands by gunpoint in many instances, or being incentivized by a new apartment in a new city and the possibility of a new job. But they're getting, many of these farmers that are moving there are bored. There's no work. They're playing mahjong all day, and they're horrified. There's no work. If there is work, they're only able to work with a work permit up until the age of 45 or 50, and then they become irrelevant. Those jobs are then given to younger people. So some of these farmers, when they hit 45 or 50, they're trying to return back to their farms, and their farms have been bulldozed over. There's nothing to return to. Now, the Chinese government plans on moving millions and millions of people to occupy these ghost cities by the year 2025. Now, let's talk about the ghost cities in the United States. Let's talk about this. These are lifeless cities right now. Any of you that are listening, you can go down into the downtown areas where you live, and you'll see these multi-stories being built by out-of-city firms. Got to start researching where these firms are from, because this is not only breaking news that I'm talking about right now. This is an advancing story, and I'm going to give you the bullet points to it. I've already done the framework on it. I already know what's going on, but you can all help research this in further depth. So what we have is climate weather weapons turning us into climate refugees. We have over 5,000 homes burned here now in Northern California, a total of 8,000 structures, and many of the people are gone. They're just gone. They've relocated because there's no housing here. It increased our homelessness enormously here. I'm looking at Santa Monica, I'm looking at Hollywood, and I'm looking at Los Angeles. And they've got these unoccupied towers built by out-of-town firms. And the traffic there is referred to as Carmageddon. You can't move more than 4 feet. I have a friend that commutes from West L.A. to Pacific Palisades. It used to take a half hour, 45 minutes. It takes 3.5 hours now because of the traffic. And these cars are passing by all of these empty high-rises that no one's in. And some of these high-rises rent, if you're lucky, you can find a one-bedroom, very small, for about $2,500 a month. Larger places are going around $8,000 a month. $8,000 a month. And they're empty. So what do we have here in the United States? We have increased weather weapons assaulting all of us, creating climate refugees. And we have a lot of empty buildings. I want you to think about that. This is a forced relocation using weather weapons. In China, they're using guns. And they're incentivizing the people, giving them a free apartment, and turning them out to pasture when they're 45 or 50 with no jobs. They need a permit to live in the ghost cities in China. A permit.
We want to thank Deborah Tavares. Her website is www.stopthecrime.net. Please check it out at www.stopthecrime.net.
Great show. Great show.
Great show. Unbelievable information. We want to thank Deborah Tavares again for coming on. And hold on, Deborah.